Imagine spending 50 years building a $200 million empire, not for your children, but to make a point that would shatter them the moment you were gone. On a cold December afternoon in 2025, the world lost a legend, but his family lost something far more valuable than a father. They lost their future. As the private reading of Rob Reiner's will concluded, the silence in the room wasn't from grief. It was the sound of a total, calculated betrayal. $200 million, every cent earned from Hollywood's greatest hits, was gone. Donated, signed away to strangers. While the public cheered for his noble final act, his children were left standing in the wreckage of a legacy that had effectively erased their names. But as the shock wore off, a darker question began to surface. Was this truly an act of charity, or was it a final, cold-blooded lesson for children he no longer trusted? The battle that followed didn't just happen in a courtroom. It started with a discovery in a Brentwood mansion that changed everything we thought we knew about the Reiner family. The story doesn't actually begin with the money. It began on December 14, 2025, inside the walls of a sprawling Brentwood estate that had long been a fortress of Hollywood royalty. When Rob and Michelle Reiner were found lifeless, the industry came to a standstill. But while the headlines focused on the loss of a cinematic genius, a much more clinical and quiet process was unfolding behind the scenes. Within days, the bodies were moved, the examinations by the Los Angeles coroner were fast-tracked, and by December 19th, the remains were already being handled by Mount Sinai mortuary. There was no public viewing, no star-studded memorial for the man who gave us When Harry Met Sally. Instead, his son Jake stood as the sole informant on the certificates, ushering his parents toward a swift, private cremation. To the outside world, it looked like a family honoring Jewish tradition by moving quickly, but to those watching closely, the speed felt like an attempt to bury more than just remains. The ashes were whisked away to Jake's private residence, kept in urns that served as a haunting reminder of a life that ended as abruptly as a jump cut in a movie. Sources close to the inner circle whisper that the atmosphere wasn't just somber, it was paranoid. The siblings, Jake and Romy, were suddenly the keepers of a massive secret, navigating a house that had gone from a home to a crime scene of the heart. They were holding on to their parents' ashes, but they were already losing their grip on the $200 million legacy that was supposed to be their safety net. Rumors suggest that even in those first 48 hours, the tension was rising. They weren't just mourning, they were looking for a paper trail. They knew their father was a man of principles, but they never expected those principles to be a weapon directed at them. And as the dust settled from the funeral, the real nightmare was just starting to materialize in the form of a legal document that felt like a slap in the face. But the missing money was only the tip of the iceberg, because what the investigators found in the family's private records would soon turn this tragedy into a full-blown scandal. Behind the glitz of the Beverly Hills elite, a storm was brewing long before that fatal Sunday. The night before their bodies were discovered, Rob and Michelle attended a holiday party hosted by Conan O'Brien, a staple of the Hollywood social calendar. But eyewitnesses claim the Reiners weren't celebrating. They were seen in a heated, low-voiced argument with their son, Nick. Rumors suggest that Nick, who had battled personal demons for over a decade, was freaking people out, acting erratic and pressing guests with uncomfortable questions. Rob, always the protector of the family image, reportedly reached his breaking point, chastising his son in front of the industry's biggest names. This wasn't just a small family spat. It was the culmination of years of tough love that had clearly failed. By the time the Reiners left the party, the air was thick with a tension that didn't just stay in the car. What happened in those missing hours between the party and the discovery the next afternoon is where the story turns truly dark. Some sources speculate that the argument continued behind the closed doors of their Brentwood mansion, escalating into something no one could have predicted. The missing hours are now the focus of a massive investigation, with detectives piecing together surveillance footage and hotel records to understand why a family dinner turned into a crime scene. It was Romy Reiner who finally broke the silence. On the afternoon of December 14th, after a massage therapist couldn't reach the couple, Romy entered the home and walked into a nightmare. She found her father first, lifeless in the master bedroom, and fled the house in such a state of shock that she reportedly didn't even realize her mother had suffered the same fate. Within hours, the Brentwood intersection was swarming with LAPD. But the real shocker came just 6 hours later when Nick Reiner was intercepted by police. Nick wasn't just a grieving son, he was the primary suspect. Charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, he was whisked away to the Twin Towers Correctional Facility, wearing a suicide prevention vest. The public was left reeling. How could the son of the man who preached boundless empathy be the one accused of such a sharp and violent act? But as the legal system began to grind, the focus shifted from the how to the why. Investigators began looking into Nick's past, the 18 stays in rehab, the periods of homelessness, and the stolen money incidents from his teenage years. This wasn't a sudden snap. It was a decades-long fracture that finally shattered the house of Reiner. As if the double homicide wasn't enough to tear the family apart, the reading of the will added a layer of financial cruelty that left the remaining siblings, Jake and Romy, in a state of legal war. Rob Reiner's fortune, built on the back of Seinfeld royalties and legendary films like A Few Good Men, totaled over $200 million. But the document didn't name his children as the primary beneficiaries. Instead, the vast majority was funneled into charitable foundations, specifically those focused on early childhood education and social justice. To the public, this was the ultimate act of a philanthropist. To Jake and Romy, it felt like being erased. Reports from within their legal circle suggest they were blindsided. They had spent their lives in the shadow of their father's tough love philosophy, but they never expected to be locked out of the estate entirely. They immediately began exploring the Slayer Statute, a California law that prevents a killer from inheriting. But their fight wasn't just about Nick. They were looking for ways to challenge the entire trust structure, claiming their father might have been under undue influence or emotional distress when he finalized those charitable donations. They hired the heavy hitters of Hollywood probate law, preparing for a battle that would pit their father's public legacy against their private survival. But the real secret isn't just in the money. It's in a set of sealed medical records that the LAPD is fighting to keep hidden from the public eye. To understand why $200 million felt like a birthright to the Reiner children, you have to look at how that mountain of gold was built. It wasn't just luck, it was a half-century of strategic dominance in the entertainment industry. It began with the loudmouthed character of Meathead on All in the Family, but the real wealth came when Rob stepped behind the camera. Think about the cultural weight of When Harry Met Sally, Misery, and A Few Good Men. These weren't just movies, they were box office juggernauts that came with back-end deals. This meant that every time someone streams a Reiner classic or a cable network airs a marathon, the checks keep rolling into the Reiner estate. But the crown jewel of the fortune was Castle Rock Entertainment. When Rob co-founded that company in 1987, he created a hit factory that produced Seinfeld, arguably the most profitable sitcom in television history. When Castle Rock was sold in the 90s, Rob walked away with a payout that could have funded several lifetimes. Then there was the real estate. The Brentwood mansion wasn't just a home, it was a trophy, purchased from legendary producer Norman Lear for $4.75 million and ballooning to a value of nearly $14 million. He also held a Malibu beachfront villa in the exclusive Colony area, a place where the dirt alone is worth millions. For Jake and Romy, this wasn't just Dad's money, it was the backdrop of their entire lives. They grew up in these halls, and the idea that a stranger at a charitable foundation would now hold the keys to those gates was a pill too bitter to swallow. They felt like they were being evicted from their own history. As the legal battle heated up, a dark and rarely discussed California law moved to the center of the conversation, the Statute. In simple terms, this law prevents anyone who feloniously and intentionally kills another person from inheriting any property or receiving any benefit from the victim's estate. With Nick Reiner behind bars, the law seemed to automatically cut him out of the picture. But this created a massive, unintended consequence for Jake and Romy. If Nick was disqualified and the will specifically funneled the rest to charity, the siblings were effectively trapped in a legal no-man's land. Sources close to the legal team suggest that Daniel Kraus, the high-powered attorney hired by the siblings, began looking for a different angle. If they couldn't get the money through the front door of inheritance, they would have to break down the walls of the trust itself. They began questioning the testamentary capacity of Rob Reiner. Was he truly in his right mind when he signed the final version of the will? They started digging into his private journals and emails, looking for any sign of cognitive decline or emotional manipulation. The narrative they wanted to build was simple. Their father didn't leave them out because he wanted to be a hero. He left them out because he was a man broken by the trauma of his son's struggles, making a decision out of spite rather than sound judgment. It was a risky move that threatened to drag their father's name through the mud, but with $200 million on the line, the gloves were completely off. While Rob was the public face of the family, those in the inner circle knew that Michelle Singer Reiner was the true architect of the family's social and financial philosophy. She wasn't just a supportive spouse, she was a strategist who co-produced films and sat on the boards of their most influential foundations. It was Michelle who reportedly pushed for the independence doctrine. She believed that the greatest curse a parent could give a child was a trust fund soul. She saw what was happening to Nick, the cycle of rehab and relapse, and she feared that a massive inheritance would only accelerate his downward spiral. This is where the mystery deepens. Some speculate that the charitable donation wasn't Rob's idea alone, but a pact made between him and Michelle to save their children from the burden of wealth. But if that's true, why didn't they leave a safety net for Jake and Romy, who had stayed on the right path? Rumors have surfaced about a hidden trust, a secondary document that was supposed to provide for the siblings, but mysteriously disappeared or was never signed. This phantom document has become the holy grail for the legal team. If it exists, it could prove that Rob and Michelle never intended for their children to be left with nothing. But without it, Jake and Romy are fighting against a ghost, trying to prove an intention that was never put to paper. And just when it seemed the legal war couldn't get more personal, a whistleblower from one of the charitable foundations came forward with a claim that would change the direction of the entire case. Just as the legal teams for Jake and Romy were preparing to file their first formal challenge against the $200 million charitable trust, a bombshell report emerged from an unexpected source. A former administrative assistant for one of the primary foundations Rob supported came forward with claims that the charitable gift wasn't as ironclad as it appeared. According to this whistleblower, Rob had allegedly held several private meetings in the months leading up to December 2025, expressing deep hesitation about the finality of his estate plan. The rumor suggests that Rob was looking for a way to create a performance-based inheritance, a structure where his children would receive their shares only after hitting specific life milestones or maintaining long-term stability. This changes the entire narrative. It suggests that Rob didn't want to cut them out of spite. He was trying to build a safety valve to protect them from the very wealth he had created. If these meetings were documented, it could be the smoking gun Jake and Romy need to prove that the current will, which leaves everything to charity, was either an unfinished draft or a placeholder that was never meant to be the final word. The legal battle has now shifted from a fight over greed to a search for a father's true final intent. While the money is one half of the tragedy, the missing hours in Brentwood remain the darkest part of the Reiner legacy. In late December 2025, a Los Angeles Superior Court judge took the rare step of sealing the autopsy records for both Rob and Michelle. This move, requested by the LAPD, is common in high-profile homicides, but in the context of a $200 million inheritance battle, it has sparked a firestorm of speculation. What could be in those records that is too sensitive for the public to see? Some legal experts suggest that the simultaneous death rule, the Uniform Simultaneous Death Act, could be the key. If the autopsies show that one spouse survived the other by even a few minutes, it could completely change how the community property is distributed. In California, if a couple dies within 120 hours of each other without a clear survivor, the law treats them as if they predeceased one another. But if Rob survived Michelle, her half of the $200 million might have flowed through his specific will, the one that favors the charities. If she survived him, her estate plan might have been different. The siblings are now fighting a war of seconds and inches, where the findings of a medical examiner could be the difference between a lifetime of wealth or a lifetime of what-ifs. At the end of the day, the story of Rob and Michelle Reiner isn't just about a director's hits or a staggering bank balance. It is a haunting reflection on the complexity of love, the weight of expectations, and the thin line between a gift and a lesson. Rob spent his life telling stories where the underdog wins and the family finds a way back to each other. But in his own final act, the script went off book. He left behind a fortune that was intended to save the world, but in doing so, he may have inadvertently shattered the world of those closest to him. The $200 million battle continues to rage in the shadows of Beverly Hills, but the real verdict has already been delivered. The Reiner children are living in a reality where their father's tough love has become a permanent, unchangeable law. Whether Jake and Romy eventually claw back a portion of that wealth, or whether the foundations keep every cent, the Reiner name has been forever altered. It is a reminder to all of us that the most important legacy isn't written in a will or stored in a vault. It's found in the conversations we have before the silence takes over. Was Rob Reiner a visionary philanthropist or a father who simply ran out of time to fix his family? Perhaps the answer is buried with the ashes, kept close by children who are still waiting for a father who won't be coming home to explain why. Thank you for following this deep dive into one of Hollywood's most tragic and complex inheritance wars. If this story of power, betrayal, and $200 million hit home for you, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden lives of the elite. And tell us in the comments, if you were in Rob's shoes, would you leave it all to change the world, or would you give your children one last chance to get it right? Because in the world of the ultra-famous, the final credits may roll, but the drama never truly ends.